On his 89th birthday in my imagination. This is a novel. Donald Trump is celebrating both his birthday and the 20th anniversary of his first run for the presidency. He is at Trump Tower, going down the famous golden elevator, and he dies of a massive brainstem stroke on the elevator as he's going down. The people who had gathered for a party decide that it's a deep state assassination and begin rioting and go out on Fifth Avenue in New York and bash pedestrians and car windows and store windows. And it's the first spectacular piece of violence, spontaneous violence, that then results a year later in an uprising, in a true right-wing uprising.
I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast podcast, and today's guest has spent the last 3 years imagining Donald Trump's death for his novel. So we get into that. What is it like imagining the president's death for a living? And also we get into which of Trump's goons has he been hate-watching the most recently, and who does he think is emerging as a plausible contender for the Democratic presidency in 2028. Okay, I'm talking, of course, about our regular guest, Kurt Andersen. Before we get into the conversation, I just want to remind you, please subscribe to the Daily Beast podcast wherever you get it. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and don't forget to leave us a comment on YouTube after you've watched it, telling us your favourite part of the conversation and who else you would like us to interview. Okay, that's enough throat clearing and preamble. Let's get into it with the author, with the commentator, with the broadcaster, and with the novelist, and the man who coined the phrase short-fingered vulgarian when he was a co-founder of Spy magazine, Kurt Andersen. Kurt Andersen, I am so glad to be clutching a copy of your book, The Breakup. You spent 3 years writing it, and in that time you have imagined the death of Donald Trump. A smile crept across your face when I said that. Tell us, can you tell us in the book, without too much of a spoiler alert, how he dies? Because it's not perhaps as one would imagine.
Well, it is, the book is set in 2045, and there's a backstory to 2035, when at age 89, in fact on his 89th birthday in my imagination, this is a novel, Donald Trump is celebrating both his birthday and the 20th anniversary of his first run for the presidency. He is at Trump Tower, going down to meet his throng of January 6 pardonees and MAGA people and ICE agent pardonees and this crowd of his to celebrate and party, going down the famous golden elevator, and he dies of a massive brainstem stroke on the elevator as he's going down. The people gathered, who had gathered for a party, decide that it's a deep state assassination and begin rioting and go out on Fifth Avenue in New York and bash pedestrians and car windows and store windows. And it's the first spectacular piece of violence, spontaneous violence, that then results a year later in an uprising, in a true right-wing uprising, terrorist uprising, because the Democrats, meantime, in the last few years, in the early 30s, have had a full comeback into federal power.
Okay, so the breakup refers to two breakups,
Yes.
right? There's a divorce in it,
Yeah.
but it really refers to the breakup of America. You, as a regular guest on the podcast, you spend a lot of time thinking about what's happening culturally to America with this current president, and it's odd that we're recording this on a Thursday, and it's actually 10 years, I think, to the day since Donald Trump accepted the Republican nomination to be president. So it's particularly timely that you're here. How much have you sucked out of the chaos that's going on now to inform this book?
It's a good question. My last two books were these big nonfiction books about 500-year American history and 50 years of American history, as a friend said, and you like repeating, basically my two fucking of America books.
Right.
And so those certainly fed into this. And I for a while I was thinking, oh, I should maybe I should write a nonfiction book about what the future could hold. I said, no. I'm done with those. I'll return to novels. This is my fifth one. And so, but certainly I was fed by that and fed by the last 3 years, as you say. I mean, when I started, it was set in the future, so of course AI would be part of it and robots and all that stuff. But a month after I started writing, ChatGPT appeared. So it was like, whoa, this is cooperating life with my writing process. And the Trump thing, of course, he was out of office and, was running, but like, back then. And then, of course, 23 led to 24, and here he is. So the last year and a half, and I was basically done when he took off, almost done when he took office this time. The horror show of this term, the nightmare, beyond what I expected, to tell you the truth, and I'm not alone in that, obviously, and what one of my characters expected, who never, thought her husband was overblown and hyperbolic in thinking, this time it's going to be a threat to democracy and all these things. Well, it was one of his, I told you so moments to his wife in this story, and so yeah, what has happened the last year and a half didn't require any kind of wholesale restructuring of my story, which was basically complete, but certainly required me to go through and darken the backstory and make, the Trump 20s, as one of the characters calls them, more horrible and nightmarish than I had them in the earlier draft.
If you've tried to quit vaping or smoking and somehow found yourself right back where you started, you are not the problem. The way you've been trying to quit might be. So many approaches focus only on nicotine, or they expect you to rely on sheer willpower. But vaping was never just about nicotine. It became a habit. That's why I think Fume is such an interesting idea. It's a flavoured air device designed to give your hands, your mouth, your brain something better to reach for when cravings hit. Fume isn't a vape. It's a device designed to distract you from cravings when your willpower isn't enough. You can enjoy over 10 flavours like classic peppermint, crisp mint, spearmint ice, maple pepper, and peach blush. Over 1 million people have already used Fume to quit differently. Join them today and grab a journey pack plus a free gift with purchase when using my code BEAST. Addiction is really good at saying, later, don't let it. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code BEAST for a free gift with your first purchase. Thank you, Fume, for sponsoring this episode.
It's crossed my mind as we think about the way that Trump seems to be setting the groundwork for the midterms. I mean, I had thought, and especially because we interviewed Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat last week, the academic from New York University who writes about autocracy and about repression. Is this a moment where actually America could break apart? That if the election feels inconclusive, is it possible, and I can't even believe I'm saying it out loud, but is it possible that there is real violence, that there is some kind of civil war in America? And you tackle that in the book. I guess my question for you as a novelist is, what does it feel like imagining and writing about violence in the country that you live in? Is it good karma to do that?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought of it as bad karma or good karma. I think it's useful to squarely and clear-eyedly face the various possibilities, the various contingencies. And I'm not saying this is inevitable or even that it's probable, but I'm saying certainly that it's possible and I think I've depicted it plausibly. And I think that in the last year and a half, in the last 3 years, since I began writing this book, it has become much less far-fetched than it seemed when I began. As this would be interesting to think about. So no, I don't. So I don't think it's bad karma. I do think it is so difficult to think about and so horrific to think about the war and the violence, let alone breaking the country into parts. But I also think will provide an ability for people to look at this future possibility with some basis for thinking about it and some framework for thinking about it.
All right, well, I'm going to come on to the blurbs you've got in a moment and ask you how much you paid for them, because the blurbs for this book are outrageous. But I wanted to ask you something else first. You've got a very good line in there about how American journalists refer to everything as a tragedy. And I'm actually going to quote it, and you go, "Life is half tragedy, for Christ's sake, maybe more than half, which is one of the reasons why I grade almost everything on a curve." And I guess my question is, are we living through an American tragedy?
Short answer, yes. I do think that we are already in a tragedy, and I don't see how we get out of it suddenly or without pain of some degree between here and whatever the end is. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I find is to imagine a happy ending. Now,
a happy ending for Trump or a happy ending for America?
Well, for America. And what I want to say is, I mean, this book is immediately categorized by the algorithms as, it's dystopian, maybe dystopian satire, but still dystopian fiction. And I had a conversation with my friend and blurber, Gary Steingart, who writes dystopian satires.
And he's got a great blurb, but we'll go on to that in a minute.
But I said, do you think of your fiction as dystopian? He said, it's and basically he said they're comedies. So sure, and I said, I agree, because I feel like dystopias are where there are zombies and everything is collapsed and it's rubble and wreckage and oh my God, it's horrible. I mean, on the other hand, if you want to say we're in a quasi dystopian situation now, I'd buy that too. So, but I feel one of the things I ended up writing with the Breakup is an ending. I wouldn't call it a happy ending, because there's a war and there's breaking up of the country. But as with divorces, and some of us at this table have been divorced, and one knows they're painful and complicated and awful in many ways, and some many worse than others. But sometimes they're mandatory, and sometimes there's no other way to manage such a thing.
And they can also be new beginnings.
Precisely. There is, as my wife, who, as last I looked, we're still married, said to me as we were talking about this very thing the other day. She said, about the book, not our marriage.
Not your divorce. not your pending divorce.
No, she said, she said, it's horrible and awful and if you're lucky, liberating, And so, I think, so in real life, and certainly in my story, 10 years from now, 15, the war itself looked pretty horrible and dystopian. But I think, out of facing the facts and dealing with the facts at hand, if we can ever do that, and that's the thing with this book and this story really, is it's hard for me to imagine how we go back to pursuit of happiness and everybody getting along without some giant spasm that provokes everybody looking at things the way they are. It's hard to imagine a great leader will come, Jon Ossoff will come and lead us all together back to a normalcy. Maybe, and that would be great, and I hope it happens, but for many years and more these days, I feel like the likelihood that it's impossible for that to happen in a normal way without some kind of fever-breaking, invasion, civil war. I don't know. Who knows? It could be many things. But just on our own, given everything, given the way we live in our digital bubbles and hate the other and hate the other and hate the other, and have different views of how life should be led and countries should be governed. It's hard to imagine it without such a violent, literally violent or not, rupture of some sort.
Here's something most people don't realise. There are companies called data brokers making billions by collecting and selling your personal information. Your address, phone number, family members, even details about your income. And it's not just about junk mail. That information fuels scam calls, phishing emails and identity theft, all without you ever knowing who's buying and selling your data. That's why I like Incogni. It automatically contacts hundreds of data brokers and requests that your information be removed, saving you from having to track them down one by one. Even better, it keeps working in the background because your information can show up again over time. If you find your data on a site they don't already cover, you can even send them the link and they'll work to get it taken down. The whole process is automated, easy to set up, and you don't have to be a tech expert, and I am definitely not one of those, to take control of your privacy. To get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan, go to incogni.com/beast or click the link in the episode description box.
Okay, so you quote in the beginning of the book, in your page of quotations, actually one of my favourite authors, Charles Dickens. And I hadn't read this full quote for a long time, and I'm actually going to get you to read it for us. Because people will know the first line, but we often forget what follows. And actually, someone else was imagining this 120 years ago, another writer. So why don't you
the
just
British
read
one?
it?
Shouldn't you be reading it?
Well, you know what? I was going to read it, and then I thought, you know what?
Okay.
I'll ask the author to read it, and I'm not asking you to read your own words, which is probably cheeky, but it's also very. It's very relevant to what you're talking about. And of course, he was writing about a completely different world 120 years ago, which at the time seemed as disruptive as what we're living through now, I think.
Absolutely right. And I'm really happy you had me to do this because, again, it's instead of just the famous first line, it goes on so beautifully.
It's so good.
So evokes the present moment. And of course, he's writing about another revolution, the previous revolution, at that point, 70-year-old French Revolution. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way.
It's so good, isn't it? And
it gave me goosebumps, to tell you the truth. Yes, it does.
Well, and it gives me goosebumps hearing you read it. And I'm rereading Great Expectations at the moment, which and
the best one. You mean the best book?
Well,
maybe.
Is it the best one?
Well, I don't know. It's one of the top 5.
We could argue about that.
One of the top 5.
Yes, definitely. And I was thinking about the Atlantic wrote a piece, and in fact, I was going to ask you this question. The Atlantic just wrote a long piece saying we're experiencing the ending of reading. So I wanted to know what you thought about writing a novel if we're going through the end of reading. In the piece, she talks about how our syntax and our grammar is getting more simple, that actually precisely because people aren't reading people like Dickens who write in long sentences with endless clauses and complicated plot lines that you have to follow, we're actually all getting slightly simpler. But did you think about writing a novel for people now? Novels feel somehow less relevant. I find them much harder to read. And I thought the piece in The Atlantic was both ridiculous, but also led to a greater truth, which is if you don't write and you don't read as much, your thinking changes.
All beautifully and perfectly said. What I think is that ambitious literature has always been read by minorities, mostly, which is minorities of the population. It's not as though, yes.
Well, it's an elite pastime, we should say.
Exactly. And of course, Dickens was not. But I think, yes, the novel way before there were computers, which is to say, in my youth, in your even your babyhood, practically, starting around the 70s and 80s. There are exceptions along the way. Tom Wolfe wrote a novel that was very, very popular and was a serious.
Oh, The Bonfire of the Vanities,
Correct.
which my then husband, we went on safari. I had taken with me The Bonfire of the Vanities, and he complained the entire trip. I never once looked up to look at the animals because I was so riveted
there
by
you go.
it. Such a good book.
It is a good book, and he was not so much for his fiction, although I was impressed by that coming out, but by his earlier nonfiction. But but there was back in when I was a young person, a child, where Gore Vidal and all kinds of novelists. I mean, John Updike, Philip Roth were big celebrities on the cover of Time magazine, which was a giant thing.
Right, which was itself a big thing.
On the Tonight Show,
Yep.
all those things. So all the ways in which novelists and novels were central to the culture peaked, 40, 50 years ago. And so I grew up, I didn't start writing novels until 1996, 9. So that's the world we've been given. So is it less so? We'll see. There are still giant bestsellers that are much, much longer than this book, for instance. So, it's and there are 330 million people in this country. If 330,000 of them read a book, it's a gigantic bestseller. So it doesn't need to be for everybody, as long as it, in one's hope that people read it and it affects how they think about the world and people and all the rest. So sure. And I worry about in the best of times, worst of times approach to what AI will do to us. Well, were I to have grandchildren, and hope I will.
Hear that, Kate and Lucy, right?
Well, yes.
Kate and Lucy, Kurt's daughters. I think that's a sign. I think your father's speaking to you through the podcast.
We've had these conversations. But, how it will be to have to think less and write less as a child growing up today, where you just, Claude, tell me everything I need to know about this. And I use it, and it's useful. But the downside of that, of making one think more simply, making one be more about images than text, we'll see.
We had Dick Costello on the podcast last Friday, and he, former CEO of Twitter, and he is investing now in a lot of AI, but he says he fears AI actually signals the end of thinking, that we're all going to think differently because this thing thinks for us. So why would you do the hard work of thinking and trying to sort something out for yourself if something else can do it so fast for you?
No, that is the great fear. And, because it's an epic of ignorance and an epic of genius or whatever.
Right. Belief and incredulity.
Well, indeed. But then for those of us who have already learned to think and write, it's an extraordinary tool, just in my little, but less little these days, use of it as this super hyper amazing research tool. And instead of just having a thesaurus reckons, what's that adjective I'm thinking? I can have a conversation about the precise context of the word I'm looking for. So I find basically for smart people, it'll make you smarter. For people who have no ability, either aren't there yet or just aren't particularly curious or, interested in reading, well, you'll get stupider. I mean that's the hard way to look at it. Similarly with the wealth situation, what it will do to the political economy. If we continue having this version of capitalism in this country we do, and the Zuckerbergs and Elons of the world, have all the money and are the tech and control big tech as they do today, well, then that's pretty dystopian. But so, however, if AI can be part of creating such bounty and relieving people of the need to do drudge-filled labor, and there's all this bounty to share, we could share it, and it'd be a closer to utopia than dystopia. So, and that's the question of, what you want to live in Norway or the United States in 50 years? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, good question. Which one will melt faster?
Well,
I wonder.
There's that.
All right, I'm going to read a couple of blurbs for your book, and then I want to move on to talk about another dystopian figure, Pete Hegseth, who I know you've been watching this week. All right, this is from Gary Steingart. Pairing two divorces, one personal, one national, within a novel that's funny and beautiful is something few writers could do. Thank you, universe, for Kurt Andersen and this page turner. If that isn't thanking the universe, who writes that? How much did you pay him?
I bought him a drink afterwards.
Okay.
I did buy him a drink. So
all right.
that. But it was afterwards, and it wasn't promised. It was just a friendly drink.
Okay. All right. And then another quote. This is from Walter Isaacson, who, of course, wrote the biographies on Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. Kurt Andersen is the most brilliant social novelist of our time in the tradition of Tom Wolfe, who you mentioned, and Don DeLillo, but even funnier and deeper. With a light touch and an instinct for telling details, he mixes pitch-perfect satire with profound insights. Okay, that's enough. And here's my promise to you, is that we will call the White House and ask them what they think of you imagining Donald Trump's death on the golden escalator. We'll see what he says. We'll see what machine gun lips Caroline Levitt.
Yes, or Stephen Chung, my favorite of those people. Well, Stephen Chung is better on he's a scumbag. He's better on the brutish thing. But interestingly, I had a book out in 2009 called Reset that the New York Post called Donald Trump to ask about. And because I'd compared him in that book unfavorably to Warren Buffett, who I knew as a child because we both grew up in Omaha.
Oh, of course, Nebraska, right.
And saying Warren, good billionaire, the idiot Donald Trump in 2009, bad billionaire. And he gave a great quote and included me in his pantheon of third-rate writers.
Well, he probably upped the fact you called him a bad billionaire because he probably wasn't a billionaire at that point, technically, right? But he just, that seems to be, as long as you describe him as rich, he's happy.
Yeah, that's probably true.
All right, so let's talk about the goons that he has around him. You mentioned Jon Ossoff earlier. Jon Ossoff, particularly good filleting both Jay Clayton, who's standing for the National Intelligence job to replace Tulsi Gabbard, and the acting intelligence chief, Bill Pulte, and also Pete Hegseth. What did you think of Hegseth at his hearings?
I keep a running list in my head, have since 2017, of who in Washington, basically, I am most viscerally, I find just the loathing I feel on a visceral level, beyond policy, just who do I really hate? And it changes, and I rank them 1 to 10. I haven't done it in a while. But Pete Hegseth is very high up there right now. And I hate watch him avidly. And so I loved
you hate watch him avidly.
The confrontation of calm, even keeled, never yelling, but not without emotion. Senator Ossoff talking to him about, basically, it was about, this was a hearing, I think of.
Is this where he's asking for more money?
He's asking for, yeah, so it's the
A
Appropriations
lot more money.
Committee. It's the Senate Appropriations Committee. And Ossoff is saying, well, 4 months ago, 16 days or whatever it was into the war, you were saying, we have destroyed their military and they're combat incapacitated, I think was the phrase, or something close. And he said, was that an inaccurate statement? So it's a very kind of, not you liar or you whatever, just, was that an inaccurate statement? And of course, Hegseth says, well, we sunk the Navy, which is like, oh, everyone is so worried about the Iranian Navy before we sunk it in a day. And it's the thing that he and Trump always say, like, well, we sunk the Navy and we got rid of the Air Force. So he didn't answer the question. And he said, I'm asking you, Mr. Hegseth, if that was an inaccurate statement. You also said this. He repeats this again and again and again. And each time Hegseth getting angrier and angrier in his high tea way, doesn't answer and just says, no, well, we did this and we did this. And then Ossoff asked him, but he basically just and keeps even keeledly asking him, was that an inaccurate statement or was that an accurate statement? And then finally, I actually wrote it down. Yes, Iran's military has been completely destroyed, combat ineffective. That's not accurate, is it? And he just never will give in. And just in his increasing undoneness at being asked this very simple question, were you wrong when you said this war is about over 4 months ago or not? And he wouldn't, and it was just, you could see in his comic book way, the smoke coming out of his head as calm young Jon Ossoff was questioning him. It was fantastic.
So Ossoff seems to have shot up, we've discussed this on Sir Trump's head, seems to have shot up the ladder of Democratic hopefuls. I mean, 2 appearances that suddenly put him in front of people. And as you say, incredibly calm, wasn't reading. I mean, I always find it interesting, and I find it, frankly, a bit disappointing, the level of questioning that goes on from senators and the way they lead, the way they read the questions. And you think, are you not on top of this material? Did your people not brief you? Are you nervous you're going to get it wrong? And sometimes you're sitting on the edge of your seat worrying that they're going to get the question out wrong somehow. And you had none of that anxiety with him. He seemed completely in control of the material, wasn't going to get annoyed. And as you say, the contrast with Pete Hegseth just seemed increasingly obvious.
Yeah.
Do you trust this man? And also Hegseth, who was in charge of 2 veteran affairs associations, both of which he left unceremoniously after people complained he was a chaotic manager and there were financial shenanigans.
Yes, as opposed to this multi-trillion-dollar operation he's now running. No, and it was extraordinary. So Ossoff, I mean, again, what Ossoff has, in addition to being smart, obviously, is just enough performative ability. And in this day and age, to be considered as a possible president, certainly, that's a necessary thing, whether you're, Barack Obama or, in his way, Donald Trump. You need to be a good character in the show. And by the way, congressional hearings are shows. They just are. Right. Yes, when I was 17 years old or 18 years old watching the Watergate hearings, there was apparently revelations about the White House secret taping system existing, but they knew that. They knew that ahead of time, that was going to be the big story of the day. It's a show. And so you have to, both put on a show, but not seem too much like you're putting on a show, which is one of Hegseth's problems and many of the...
Well, and Pam Bondi's problem and Kristi Noem's problem, that they come and they're like, this is for an audience of one. I'm going to get really angry because that's what worked for Brett Kavanaugh.
Exactly.
Oddly, I think he sort of set the standard for the current shows. Yeah, the sort of red-faced, puce anger, flex spitting fury.
Well, especially when he was facing then Senator Kamala Harris, who was, again, this kind of calm prosecutorial questioner. No, absolutely, that's right. And because the WWE in professional wrestling sort of is so much their model for the show in the largest sense of the Trump show. The Pam Bondi comes on as a caricature of a villain. I'm a tough villain lady. And Hegseth in his cartoon way and his hair, which I was worried as I was combing my hair. I said to Anne, is my hair a little too Hegseth-y? But no, he and his little stupid...
Oh, his pocket square. His pocket square, which is like an accessory you would buy from American Girl dolls, right?
Well, he's like a cartoon character, but he's like a cartoon character in the famous Liechtenstein pop art pictures of these, military heroes going pop, bang, rah. That's Hegseth. He's ridiculous, which is why I like watching him as much as I do.
Who are the other cabinet members that you similarly... I mean, you said you had a list of the worst people around Trump. Pam Bondi's now left. Kristi Noem's now left. Actually, the women have basically left. Who are the others that you hate watch?
Well, Bobby Kennedy, of course. And
Bobby Kennedy, from whom you bought cocaine when you were at Harvard.
Yes, the one time I bought cocaine in my life. He was my cocaine dealer.
Right.
But, for instance, as Pete Hegseth now in his caricature, self-parodying way wants every member of the armed services, all several million of them, including women, to get tested for whether they have potentially low testosterone, because obviously they should all be as jacked up as I am. Is I'm sure what he's thinking. Interestingly, of course, Bobby Kennedy, not so long ago, on Stephen Miller's wife's podcast, said,
You may be one of the only people that's watched Stephen Miller's wife's podcast.
My people give it to me.
Katie Miller. Oh, right.
Katie Miller's podcast.
Katie Miller's podcast.
Bobby Kennedy said that Mehmet Oz, the actual doctor who works for Bobby Kennedy in the Health and Human Services Department, said that he'd checked over Donald Trump's testosterone levels and that he, Dr. Oz, had never seen a level that high in somebody over 70. So they're just all, and of course, Hegseth and Bobby Kennedy famously, did their pull-ups together in jeans and shirtless because they're just, in this, I don't know, to me, kind of homoerotic gym rat photo op life that they're all about. And like, I got my high T and so, but yeah, Bobby Kennedy. I mean, he's not, you don't see him that much anymore. He's not as front and center. And
I'm assuming that's deliberate, that they understand that the vaccines really don't play. They might play with a curious part of the MAGA base, but they don't play with the entire MAGA base.
That's true. And I also think he's not smart and he's kind of dumb, but he's not, I think he may be thinking about his next chapter. And like, maybe it's time to sort of separate myself from this guy a little bit. Although still occasionally in the family, in Katie Miller's podcast, reminding everybody that the president has very, very high testosterone.
High testosterone. So he's separating himself from Trump, and clearly the Trump people, I'm sure this is organized by Susie Wiles, are slightly separating themselves from him. What about J.D. Vance? Have you read J.D. Vance's book, Communion, yet?
I started it, and I moved on to other things. I moved on to regime change. But no, I haven't. And I'm eager to, because he's also in my top 10 of loathsome. I mean, maybe number one. Again, I won't commit to that now because I haven't thought it through, but J.D. Vance may be the top, because he's just so completely craven, combined with what has seemed along the way and what he makes a show of being, this sanctimonious searching for God and purpose and escaping his unhappy childhood and all that. So the sanctimony, which I understand the book is full of, and about his journey to a better version of Catholicism than the Pope himself has done. But have you read it?
I'm slightly stuck on page 100. I had a sort of run at it, and it's, as far as I can see, it's really about him looking for something to do. And I haven't quite got to the Catholicism bit yet. I've got to the point where he meets Peter Thiel, and Peter Thiel, like the Pied Piper, leads him off to Silicon Valley. Have you watched his wife's podcast, Story Time with the Second Lady?
I've seen only clips. I watched her whole one with the president, which again was just such a wonderful spectacle of the man I call, among other things, the greatest self-parodist of all time, Donald Trump. It was just remarkable. So that was remarkable. But no, I've not watched Usha's other podcasts.
Well, it's worth watching because we have Cheryl Hines. So she talks. So the story she chooses is
that's my Bobby Kennedy wheelhouse.
Well, exactly. And the story she chooses to read is The Three Little Pigs. And when Usha Vance asks her, "Why did you choose this story?" literally Cheryl Hines says, apparently without irony, "I like pigs." It just hangs in the air there. J.D. Vance, whose story is, it's A.A. Milne, it's Christopher Robin, which he manages to overcomplicate. He says it's quite difficult to understand the beginning, and it's like, it's literally the easiest, most beautiful children's story you could imagine.
What, Winnie the Pooh?
Mm-hmm. Winnie the Pooh.
J.D. Vance talks about Winnie the Pooh with
Yeah, J.D. Vance reads a Winnie the Pooh story.
That was my first important book, was Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, wonderful books, absolutely wonderful books, and great illustrations.
You should read those. I'd buy the audiobook of Joanna Coles reading Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, maybe I should do that. All right.
And then you could do it in the Melania accent as well, and I would love it even more.
How would you go, Winnie, or Winnie the Pooh?
Yeah.
I read Winnie the Pooh to Baron Trump. He not like books. Baron, he like Tate brothers. Are the Tates going to be extradited? I thought it was a good move that the White House said they weren't going to stand in the way of the Tate brothers, and if the British wanted to take them back, they could. I don't know how fast they can get that moving. I was very surprised by that because they helped them get out of Romania.
Yeah. I'm so horrified by them and Andrew, who I know more about than the brother, that I don't, and I know what I'm going to find if I read more, so I don't. I know the basic horror show, misogynist warriors stories that they are. I enjoyed watching the arrest, though, and I enjoyed seeing what Andrew Tate, because I'm superficial on some level, was wearing, which is to say, as Tom Nichols, I think, said, and I agreed with him in Extended.
Tom Nichols at the Atlantic.
He said, basically, he somebody said, "What are these? Are these shorts? Or are these? What are the pants that he's wearing?" And he said, "No, they're capri pants," which Mary Tyler Moore made famous back in the '60s, which I thought was hilarious, being old too and remembering the Dick Van Dyke Show and Mary Tyler Moore. And I saw that he had on the same flats, the same sort of slippers that Mary Tyler Moore wore on that show, and which I was able to add to the comparison. But no, so I enjoyed that. And God knows they should be sent back, and those are some aliens that should be deported, certainly. But no, I've not. I mean, that's I have a maximum of trash I need in my mind at any moment. So the Tates have not yet really. I don't want more of them in my head.
But fair enough. Well, let's hope that Andy Burnham, the new Prime Minister of Britain, can put them up on trial.
I have a question about Andy Burnham.
Far away.
Well, it won't be a long conversation. And again, superficial. Why does Burnham look so like Keir Starmer? And there's been previous prime ministers who looked. There's one, white man Englishman look that those two have, and others have. And then occasionally there's the Indian British guy, and then there's the women occasionally, but otherwise they all look like this kind of wankery guy. Why is that?
Interesting. I actually hadn't thought they looked similar, partly because I think they give off such different energy. And Andy Burnham, first of all, who knew that there could be a Labour politician who was quite so ruthless? I mean, the ability he's had to get rid of Keir Starmer, who made the party electable, who took over from the real socialist Jeremy Corbyn,
right,
who made Labour unelectable.
And gave socialism a bad name.
And gave socialism a terrible name, and was an anti-Semite. How Keir Starmer managed to lose his job, having been elected with such a big majority of Labour MPs, is really a testament to Andy Burnham's extreme ambition, and that he got someone to leave their seat, because you have to be an MP
right,
to be Prime Minister. He was the Mayor of Greater Manchester. He had been a Cabinet Minister and had left the Cabinet to go and run Manchester, which he did pretty successfully, actually. But he's got extreme ambition, and he's got an energy that Keir Starmer doesn't have. Keir Starmer was a prosecutor. I mean, he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service, and he treats everything as if it's a legal problem. He's got no ability to speak about vision, and he's a terrible public speaker. He was the guy that got the party elected, and then he's had to step aside.
Yeah.
And now he's hustling to be the Secretary General of the UN.
Right.
Because why wouldn't you want to fly around countries, dispensing advice despite the fact you couldn't run your own country?
I mean, and as you say, he was overwhelmingly elected and made Labour electable again, but also became.
And they don't all look the same. Boris Johnson didn't.
No,
look the
Boris
same.
Johnson's another one.
Boris
I
is
agree.
a
I'm
total
telling you,
character.
I'll send you the two pictures I saw together of Starmer and Burnham, and saying, well, and it's partly when a certain kind of guy is standing outside 10 Downing and looking like this, and worried the same, like trying to look serious in the same way they tend to look. But they do. They're also they're just like, I don't know, they're funny Englishmen to me.
They're funny Englishmen. Well, the interesting thing about Andy Burnham, actually,
You love Andy Burnham, I can tell.
No, I don't love Andy Burnham. I'm the jury is out on Andy Burnham. For me, my jury is out. Except that I like that he comes from the north because I come from the north, so I appreciate that.
I get that.
But I also like the fact that he could stand and talk to people without a podium. You know how normally and there's been this character, hot podium guy, who's the guy that carries the podium out for the 7 prime ministers that Britain has had over the last 10 years. Well, 5 in 4 years and 7 in 10 years. But he's become a character because people are like, oh, it's that guy again. And he comes out with his big arms and he's carrying the podium. Andy Burnham didn't want to compete with hot podium guys, so he did it without the podium. Just spoke to people. He's a very good politician. The difference between them, they may look similar because they're both guys of a certain age. But Keir Starmer was a terrible politician, and Andy Burnham is a ruthless politician, and that may be
Boris was the last
enough.
good politician.
Rishi Sunak, not a great politician, too technocratic, probably the smartest of all of them, and actually, if he'd had a bit longer, might have helped with the economy. And Liz Truss, head of lettuce. Was there ever a better? The head of lettuce remains the best political commentary.
Lettuce, yes.
Well, and they just had the head of lettuce. Do you remember? And it was like, who will last longer? This head of lettuce.
Yes.
And it wasn't the head of lettuce with cyclospora, as far as we know. Another treat from RFK Jr.'s FDA.
Yes. Well, no, indeed. And one that now we're getting to the problem. Well, we already had, of course, with the measles, not epidemic yet, but outbreaks that he's responsible for. The FDA not dismantling, but whatever degradation is that's a very worrisome thing.
Well, and people really don't want
And CDC
explosive
as well.
stomach issues. So
In general, most people don't.
Most people don't. Kurt Andersen, it's always a treat to have you in the studio. Thank you for coming in, and I look forward to hearing what the White House say about the breakup and how you've spent your last few years imagining Donald Trump's death.
It was a treat to me, and even though it doesn't come out for another several weeks, it can be ordered now.
So people can pre-order the breakup on Amazon
or anywhere,
or your independent bookshop.
Correct.
Your independent bookshop. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Same.
I love hearing from Kurt Andersen. I really enjoyed reading his book. And there's almost no Donald Trump in it, actually. So don't feel that you're going to be pursued by the man who seems to be in our waking consciousness at all time. But write and tell us what you thought about the conversation. Who do you hate watch among the current cabinet? And we'll be back on Monday with David Rothkopf to start your week with David's insights. Thank you if you have been for watching, for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. The reason we can bring you conversations like this is because we are independent media. And a big shout out to our production team, Ryan Murray, John Romero, Rachel Passer, Heather Passaro, and Neil Rosenhaus. So the good news is we have so many B-Beast tier members now. There are too many names to read out, and we really appreciate your support.